I have been asked a question. What is dissociation and what is the role of dissociation in the psychological response to trauma? In this video, I shall answer that. Please join me for the time it takes. Welcome. I'm Dr Michael Paterson, Clinical Psychologist and EMDR Europe Accredited Senior Trainer. I want to help you become the best you can possibly be in dealing with your clients. In this video, I will be explaining about dissociation and helping you understand it from the perspective of the structural dissociation model. It is one of a number of different models that there are. At the end of this video, I expect that you will have a better understanding of dissociation and how to recognize it in session. What is dissociation? Perhaps you have daydreamed on occasion. If so, you have dissociated. That is a simple form of dissociation. It's very common. Many of us do. But it doesn't mean that you dissociate pathologically, because dissociation can be normal in the population. However, there are different levels of dissociation. Somebody may report feeling themselves disconnected from reality. Things are dreamlike or fog-like. That's called derealization. You may have heard of the expression, "I was beside myself." Somebody would use it in the context of having had some emotional shock or some emotional upset. They may not actually have been separate from their body looking on, as depersonalization would be, but they've used it in response to a particular situation which could, for some, lead to depersonalization. There are, however, more pathological states where somebody could actually have a separation from their present reality and switch to a different state altogether, such as in this picture of dissociative identity disorder. How do you know if somebody has dissociation or if somebody dissociates pathologically? It would be useful to screen clients for dissociation. A very good instrument, it is a screening tool, is the Dissociative Experiences Scale 2. It has 28 items and it asks questions about how often do you experience a particular symptom. For example, some people find themselves driving along the road and they find that they can't remember all or part of the trip. Circle the percentage of the time this happens to you. Well, let's face it, it's highway amnesia. There's a good chance that you have experienced that. It doesn't mean, of course, that you dissociate pathologically. It's normal dissociation. But there are 8 items on the DES which, if rated significantly, could indicate that the client does dissociate pathologically. I'll show you what these items are, these key questions. Have a look at this slide. The first one, in a place and no idea how they got there. What is that about? Imagine in this particular state, I go somewhere, a state switch occurs, I switch to this state and I'm looking around. Where am I? I don't recognize where I am. In this particular state, I don't have access to the memories that this particular state does. There's like an amnestic barrier between the two. Blocks it off. One doesn't know about the existence necessarily of the other part. The next item on the list of 8 questions is new things in their belongings that they don't recall buying. The same principle applies with that. In one particular state, something was brought home. A state switch occurs. The other state can't access the memories of the state that actually bought the items. Question 3. Standing beside themselves or watching themselves act in some way. That's depersonalization. It's like me standing over there somewhere, watching Michael talking to you on camera. The next item, told they don't recognise friends or family. Imagine the scenario. I'm talking to my cousin. He says to me, "Michael, I saw you up the town on Tuesday and you ignored me." "Maybe I didn't see you." "Oh, you did. I stood in front of you, called you Michael, and you looked at me as if you didn't know me." "Oh. In fact, you were wearing that suit," the cousin says. "Well, maybe I was up the town on Tuesday. I can't remember it." "What's that about?" "Well, one particular state knows the existence of the cousin. That's me speaking to the cousin. But the state that was up the town on Tuesday doesn't know him. It doesn't share access to the same memories." The next item, feeling people, objects, or the world around them aren't real. This is derealization. That's separateness from reality. Things seem dreamlike, fog-like, surreal in many respects. The next question, feels their body doesn't belong to them. Often people who dissociate pathologically will look in the mirror and see a reflection that doesn't feel as if it's them, a different body. The next question is act in different situations like different people. The situations we're in that we need a particular way of thinking, feeling and acting. If it's appropriate for the situation we're in, things work out fine. For example, if you think about yourself as the professional therapist, you have to adopt that way of thinking, feeling and acting when you're interacting with your clients. If you're with a partner in an intimate moment, it requires you to be thinking, feeling and acting in a different way. But imagine mixing the two of those up. It could be a recipe for disaster. You could be struck off for being amorous with your client. Another item is voices inside their head telling them to do something or commenting on things that they do. Somebody who dissociates pathologically will often have these internal voices, making comments, perhaps even arguing with each other, maybe being critical of the client. We see this so often in the clients with dissociative identity disorder. Those 8 items on the dissociative experiences scale, which indicate that your client dissociates pathologically, can be tested. There is available from the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation a spreadsheet. By entering the scores from the DES, it will calculate the overall score, but it will also calculate the probability that your client dissociates pathologically. This is known as the DES taxon. If you go on to the website for ISSTD, that's isst-d.org. It's important you have the hyphen. If you go for ISSTD, you'll end up for the International Society for the Study of Trophoblastic Diseases. Once you are on that website, type in DES taxon on the search bar and it will bring up the location of it for you. There are different models of dissociation. I'm going to show you now the one that is known as structural dissociation. This came about around the turn of the last century from the work of Pierre Janet in France. It was developed by colleagues in the Netherlands in more recent years, and it is widely accepted as a good explanation of dissociation and how to understand it. There are 3 types of structural dissociation. There's primary structural dissociation, secondary structural dissociation, and tertiary structural dissociation. I'll take you through each of these, then explain each of them by way of diagrams, which hopefully will bring it more alive for you. Primary structural dissociation is characterized by 3 things: nightmares, flashbacks, and intrusive recollections. We see these often in post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't mean that our client has pathological dissociation experiencing these. It's just a feature of PTSD. Secondary structural dissociation adds in a different dimension. There is depersonalization. There is also derealization. You might also see this in PTSD, but somebody might actually have a depersonalization disorder, which is somewhat pathological. However, whenever we get to tertiary structural dissociation, this puts a different perspective on things altogether. Because what we have here are complex states separated by amnestic barriers. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that one state might exist and not know about the existence of another state that the client experiences. So let's look at this now in diagrams. Primary structural dissociation. This starts off with the concept of what we call an ANP, an apparently normal personality. The ANP is action systems for functioning in daily life, and the key thing, survival of the species, existing for the greater good of humanity. Let's think of an example. A lad of 18 who a number of years ago hankered for adventure and he joined the army. And of course he was sent off somewhere hot and sandy. Now, let's say this lad has had good enough parenting, he's well enough resourced, so he was a fairly well-adjusted individual. But there he is out on patrol with his colleagues in this hot and sandy place, and something happens. An explosion occurs. 3 of his colleagues are killed in the blast. He's knocked to the ground with lacerations, but those are the extent of his physical injuries. However, he continues to suffer psychological symptoms with nightmares, intrusive recollections, and occasional dissociative flashbacks. So what is created for this young lad then is what we call an emotional personality. Action systems for defense from major threat, and the key thing, survival of the individual. It's about looking after number one. Another example of an emotional personality might be where a ship has run aground, it's listing to the side, and people are evacuating from the ship, abandoning the ship. And somebody pushes women and children out of the way to get on the lifeboat first. That would be an emotional personality, survival of the individual. But to go back to our young lad, who is the army veteran, he's home out in the town with his friends. They're having a drink in a bar. There are friends of the friends there and out for the social occasion. And one of them is saying to our military veteran, "Did you see any action?" "I did, yes." "Well, what happened? What happened?" "I don't want to talk about it." Go on, tell me about it." "I don't want to talk about it." So at this point, the lad who was the apparently normal personality, enjoying the evening, is now moving closer to the emotional personality. He can feel himself being triggered. He's still got one foot in the present. Now there's one foot dipping into the past, and he wants to avoid this being activated. So he's becoming very resistant, very edgy, and irritable. As he's resisting speaking about his military experiences, somebody's coming past in the bar carrying a tray of drinks. They trip. The tray of drinks hits the floor, smash, the glass is smashed, and the metal tray has a resounding ding sound as it hits the floor. Of course, our military veteran's diving off his chair, diving underneath the table beside him, trying to scrape a hole in the ground, believing that he's under attack. Action systems for defense from major threat and survival of the individual. A few moments later, he may just realize that he's not under threat. He gets himself up, dusts himself down, but he can't settle. He's very edgy. He finishes his drink, makes his excuses, and leaves. What happens then when we have this overlap between the ANP and the EP? This indicates shared access to implicit and explicit memory. This is implicit memory, and this is explicit memory. The next type of structural dissociation is secondary structural dissociation. This involves one apparently normal personality, and three different types of emotional personality: submit, fight, and flight. Whenever we move on to tertiary structural dissociation, this makes it even more interesting. With tertiary structural dissociation, you might have more than one apparently normal personality. Each of these has a particular role for the greater good. One is to do with, in this case, to do with caretaking. Another, the one that goes to work. And another could be having the role of energy management. There is overlap between each of these. When our client is in this particular state, he or she will have access to the memories of things that they did when they were in each of these states, what they did at work and what they were doing when they were managing their energy. Just as you have more than one apparently normal personality, you could certainly have more than one emotional personality. You can see here the client in this state, the apparently normal personality that does the caretaking, could be the one who's come in charge of the client to their appointment. In this state, the client can tell you what they did when they were in this particular state, this emotional personality. But they have no access to what they did in this particular state or this state, this one or this one. In order for the client to be able to tell you what happened in this state, they would make the switch to this particular state and then access it. Or maybe switch to this state and then access the memory. From time to time, when our clients are in the room with us, we need to access the states that they have no conscious recollection of being in, such as this one. What I tend to do then is use ego state therapy. I would invite the client to bring into the room to join them any part or parts of you that know something about, and then I would ask about a particular experience. This could allow the client then to bring this part in, and it could just appear out of the blue. In actual fact, a number of years ago, I saw a client who was age 55, a man. And he was sitting in the room with me, and he blinked and looked at me and said, "Who are you?" Now, at this point, I adopted rule 1. You might be thinking, what is rule 1? It's don't panic. So I said to the client, let's call him John. It's not his real name, but so I asked, what name could I know you by, please? I'm Michael. I'm John. So I know John, who was age 55, came to see me, but now there's a John sitting in front of me who doesn't know me. So I said, John, what age do you feel as if you are? I'm 16. So John, age 16, do you know an older John who's age 55? No, I don't. So John, age 16, could you look at your hand? And can you tell me what age of a man would have a hand like that? Then he said, some old guy. Now, at this point, I was older than age 55, and I think, oh, that puts me in my place, doesn't it? Anyway, I said to him, can we invite John, who's age 55, into the room to join us, because he is actually you, and you are a younger part of him looking through his eyes. What do you mean? Well, if we can invite John, who's age 55, into the room. At which point then, John, who's age 55, came in to join us in the room. So we had this emotional personality, John, age 16. Now we had John, who was age 55, in the room with us as well. We can add in more states as well as part of this, but that's how things started to unfold. I introduced them and took things further from there. The thing to remember then with tertiary structural dissociation is that there is more than one apparently normal personality, and there will be more than one emotional personality. It is more tricky to work with because one state may not know about the existence of another. I hope you found that explanation of structural dissociation helpful. I mentioned in that about apparently normal personality and emotional personality, but there are other terms that are around as well. You might recognize some of these. Sound familiar? Why then do we have different names for basically the same thing? Well, look at it this way. If somebody develops a model of dissociation, they want to have their own particular names. So, I have my model of dissociation. I'm going to call these apparently normal personalities and emotional personalities. Well, I have my model and I'm going to call them schema modes. Well, that's all very well. I have my model. I'm going to call them alters. Okay, I'm calling mine ego states. We've got different names for basically the same thing. How then can you recognize dissociation in a session with a client? It can happen quite easily. If you're speaking to a client, the client might blink like this and then be speaking to you maybe in a different tone of voice. They may have been speaking in an adult male's voice and now it's a childlike voice such as that. Or they might look at you and not recognize you. That can happen. It happened to me. So what would you do if that did happen? Adopt rule 1. That is my advice. When a client switches to other states, we can engage in ego state therapy for working with those different parts. The idea is to get them to work together for the greater good, because all of those different parts exist for a reason. And as you could see in that explanation of structural dissociation, the emotional personality is there for survival of the individual. The apparently normal personality is there for the greater good of society and family and others. We can get these different parts working together so that they can pull in the same direction. It's a bit like an old-fashioned stagecoach. If the horses are tied loosely to it, they're pulling in different directions. Some might be pushing against each other. At best, the stagecoach is going nowhere. At worst, damage can be done to it. The idea of working with those different parts, with ego state therapy, for example, is to harness those horses so that they all pull in the same direction. So the power of all those horses together will be greater than 6 individual horses. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. A gestalt. I hope this explanation of dissociation has been helpful for you. I'm wanting to help you to become the best you can possibly be working with your clients. If you found this video helpful, please click like down below. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe down below. It's free. YouTube can then let you know of other videos which come up in the series. There are a few other videos that I have in this series that you may also find helpful. There will be links in the next screen that comes up.